My name is Maya, and I'm 28 years old. For the last 6 years, I've been a combat medic in the U.S. Army, a job that my family refers to, with a delicate and practiced sigh, as my extended adolescent rebellion. They always said I ran away from a real life, that I was escaping the responsibilities that came with our family name. They pictured me patching up scrapes in a dusty, irrelevant corner of the world while my brother, Leo, conquered Silicon Valley and my father, Richard, molded public policy from his seat in the state Senate. They had absolutely no idea that the very skills they held in such open contempt, the life they so casually dismissed, would soon become the only thing standing between our entire town and a historic blizzard that was preparing to bury us all alive. They never could have imagined that their own survival would depend entirely on the daughter they thought had run away. Before I dive into the story of how a single catastrophic snowstorm brought my powerful, untouchable father and my brilliant venture capitalist brother to their knees, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you the most, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And for all the new viewers, please consider subscribing. This is a community for people who understand that sometimes, your greatest strength is forged in the very fires meant to consume you. Now, let's get back to that cold December afternoon, the last day of the world as my family knew it. The family home wasn't so much a house as it was a monument to my father's ambition. A sprawling, custom-built colonial set on 100 acres of prime rural land, it was designed to project an image of old money stability and modern political power. It had columns, a long, winding driveway, and a living room so large and sparsely furnished that your voice echoed slightly, as if to remind you of your own insignificance within its walls. It was a cold house, not in temperature but in spirit. It was the place I had spent 18 years trying to earn a space in, and the last 6 trying to forget. Coming home on leave always felt less like a homecoming and more like a parole hearing. The air was thick with the unspoken verdict. Still not good enough. I remember one Christmas, a few years before the blizzard, that perfectly captured the family dynamic. I had just returned from a grueling deployment. My father stood at the head of the long mahogany dining table, a crystal glass of ridiculously expensive wine in his hand. He was in his element, a king surveying his court, which consisted of my mother, my brother, and me. "A toast," he'd announced, his politician's voice booming with practiced sincerity. "To Leo." He beamed at my brother, who sat preening in his chair. His latest venture, an app that optimizes, well, something to do with synergistic data management, just secured its second round of funding. 7 figures. My mother clapped her hands together, her eyes sparkling with pride. "He is changing the world, one algorithm at a time," my father continued. Then his eyes fell on me, and the warmth in his expression cooled by a critical 10 degrees. "And to Maya," he added, his tone shifting as if he were acknowledging a distant, slightly embarrassing cousin. "Home safe from her travels. We're all glad you've gotten this adventurous phase out of your system. Hopefully, 2016 will be the year you come back to reality." Leo raised his glass to me, a smirk playing on his lips. "To reality," he echoed, the words dripping with condescension. I just sat there, my stomach a tight knot of anger and hurt, and I sipped my water. That was my role in the family. The cautionary tale, the prodigal daughter who never quite found her way back to the approved script. My life of service, of learning to hold a life in my hands under the most immense pressure imaginable, was just a phase. My brother's app, which I was fairly certain was just a glorified calendar for corporate executives, was changing the world. The injustice of it was a constant, low-grade fever that I had learned to live with. I had stopped trying to explain the realities of my job to them. They didn't want to understand. In their world, value was measured in dollars and influence, not in lives saved or skills mastered. My world was messy, bloody, and real. Theirs was a carefully curated illusion of success, and they had no room for anything that threatened that illusion. That leave was supposed to be my last trip home before a major transfer. I told them I was considering re-enlisting for a specialized program, one that would put me on a track for a command position in medical logistics. The news had been met with the expected level of theatrical disappointment. "Maya, when does it end?" my mother had asked, her voice laced with a weary sort of grief, as if I'd announced a terminal diagnosis. "Your father needs you here. This family needs you here." What she meant, of course, was that my father's political career needed the optics of a perfect, cohesive family unit, and my continued absence was a smudge on that pristine image. The drive from the base had been long, the sky a flat, heavy gray that promised winter's worst. The radio was already buzzing with storm warnings, but in the insulated bubble of my family's world, such things were considered minor inconveniences for other people. I pulled my beat-up truck, a vehicle they all despised, up the pristine driveway and parked it discreetly to the side, as if it were a service vehicle. The moment I stepped through the door, the familiar chill had nothing to do with the weather. My father was on the phone in his study, the door pointedly ajar so his booming voice could fill the hall. He was talking to his campaign manager, dissecting poll numbers and planning his attack strategy against a political opponent. He gave me a curt wave, a gesture that said, "I'm busy with important things, find your mother." Leo was slouched on a leather sofa in the grand, echoing living room, his face illuminated by the glow of a laptop. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and he was barking into his AirPods. No, the burn rate is unsustainable if we don't scale user acquisition by Q2. Pivot the marketing. I want aggressive, disruptive messaging. We're not selling a product, we're selling a paradigm shift. He saw me, held up one finger to signal for me to wait, and continued his conversation for another 5 minutes before finally pulling the buds from his ears. "Hey sis," he said, his eyes already drifting back to the spreadsheets on his screen. "How was the drive?" "Long. The weather looks like it's going to get nasty." He scoffed, a little puff of air that was pure dismissal. "The apps say it's a dusting. A couple of inches. Max, don't get all apocalyptic on us. You army types see a catastrophe around every corner." That was the theme of the evening. At dinner, a quiet, tense affair orchestrated by my mother to project a sense of normalcy we never possessed. They treated me like a visiting anthropologist studying their tribe. They asked questions about my life that were thinly veiled criticisms. "Do they at least feed you well?" my mother asked, eyeing my plate as if expecting me to start eating with my hands. "The food's fine, Mom. And what is it you actually do all day?" Leo chimed in, swirling his wine. "I mean, what's the career path there? Do you just, put on bandages until you retire?" "It's a little more complicated than that, Leo," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "I'm a non-commissioned officer. I lead a team. I'm responsible for their training, their welfare, and their performance under fire. I manage inventory, coordinate with aviation assets for medical evacuations, and yes, sometimes I put on bandages." My father, who had been silent up to that point, dabbed his lips with a linen napkin and cleared his throat. It was his signal that a pronouncement was forthcoming. "What your brother is trying to say, Maya, is that we struggle to see the endgame. All that skill, all that discipline. It's admirable in a way, but it's in service of an institution, not in service of yourself. There's no equity, no ownership. When you decide to finally build a real life, you'll be starting from scratch." Real life. There it was again. The two-word indictment of my entire existence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that holding a soldier's hand while he bled out in the sand, promising him he wasn't alone, was more real than any stock portfolio or polling data. I wanted to tell him that the bond one had with the men and women on my team was more real than the brittle politeness that held our family together. But I didn't. I had learned long ago that it was pointless. They couldn't hear me. They were deafened by the sound of their own success. So I just nodded. "I'll keep that in mind, Dad." Later that evening, the first flakes of snow began to fall. They weren't the light, poetic flakes of a Christmas card. They were heavy and wet, sticking to the windows and clinging to the trees with a grim tenacity. I stood at the window in the living room, watching the world slowly disappear under a blanket of white. The wind began to pick up, a low, mournful howl that vibrated through the expensive double-paned glass. My training, the instincts honed in 100 hostile environments, was screaming at me. This wasn't a dusting. This was a siege. "This looks bad," I said to the room at large. My father was reading a political biography, and Leo was back on his laptop. "Seriously, we should bring in more firewood from the porch, check the batteries in the flashlights, and make sure the generator has fuel." Leo didn't even look up. "The town's got it covered. They have a whole fleet of plows. It's why we pay such high property taxes. It'll be clear by morning. I have a 9 a.m. meeting with the board of a company I'm thinking of acquiring. This little flurry isn't going to stop that." My father turned a page in his book. "Your brother's right, Maya. Just a bit of weather. Stop being so dramatic. This isn't some backwater outpost. This is Northwood Creek. We have infrastructure. We have contingencies." His confidence was absolute. A fortress built on a lifetime of having money and power solve every problem. But a blizzard doesn't care about your tax bracket. Doesn't negotiate. Simply is. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the wind outside, that they were wrong. And for the first time I felt a flicker of something other than hurt. It was a cold, hard premonition. Their world of influence and infrastructure was about to be erased, and they had no idea what was coming to take its place. I went by myself to the garage and found the old flashlights, checking their batteries. I hauled in 2 extra loads of firewood and stacked it by the hearth. They watched me with a kind of bemused pity, as if I were a child playing a make-believe game of survival. The irony was a bitter pill I had long grown used to swallowing. The night descended like a hammer blow. The wind, which had been a mournful howl, escalated into a shrieking, violent roar. The house, which had always felt so solid and imposing, seemed to groan under the assault. Sometime around 2 in the morning, the world outside the windows went from white to pure, featureless black. The power went out with a soft thump and a flicker, plunging the entire mansion into an oppressive, absolute darkness. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the wind. It was the silence of isolation. The silence of being completely and utterly cut off. I heard a thud from upstairs, then my father's panicked voice. "What happened? Where are the lights?" "Power's out," I called back, my voice calm. I was already moving, my hands finding the flashlights I had placed on the kitchen counter. I clicked one on, its beam cutting a reassuring path through the darkness. A moment later my father and Leo stumbled down the stairs, their faces pale and anxious in the wavering beam of the iPhone flashlights they were holding. Their composure, the easy arrogance they wore like a second skin, had vanished. It had been stripped away with the electricity. "The generator should have kicked on," my father said, his voice tight with anger. "I paid a fortune for that thing. Top of the line. Automatic transfer switch. Did you ever test it? Or have it serviced?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't reply. Leo was frantically swiping at his phone, a look of pure panic on his face. No signal. Nothing. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. Can't get online. We're meeting. I need to email them. "The local tower is probably down," I said, walking over to the hearth and beginning to build a fire with the wood I had brought inside. "The weight of the ice and the wind. It happens." "Well, make it unhappen," Leo snapped, his voice cracking. "There has to be a way. What about a landline?" "We had it removed 2 years ago," my mother said, her voice a frightened whisper from the shadows. "Richard said it was obsolete." They were lost. Utterly and completely lost. Stripped of their phones, their internet, their networks, they were like astronauts whose tethers to the ship had been cut. They paced the cold, dark living room like caged animals, their frustration mounting with every passing minute. My father, the senator who could command the attention of a legislature with a single speech, was reduced to cursing at a defunct generator. My brother, the tech mogul who could move millions of dollars with a few keystrokes, was rendered impotent by a lack of signal. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This was a world I understood. Yes, limited resources, a clear and present threat. In the army, we called it a degraded environment. You don't panic. You assess, you prioritize, you act. I lit the fire, and its warm glow pushed back the oppressive darkness, creating a small island of safety in the vast, cold house. I found the candles my mother kept for decorative purposes and lit them, their soft light lending the room a surreal, almost medieval atmosphere. I did an inventory of the pantry and the freezer, my mind automatically calculating calories and duration. My father watched me, his expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. "What are you doing?" "I'm figuring out how long we can last with what we have." "Last? Maya, for God's sake, the plows will be here by noon. This is a temporary inconvenience." "Dad," I said, turning to face him, my voice even but firm. "Look out the window." I shone my flashlight on the glass. The snow wasn't just falling anymore. It was a solid, swirling wall of white. It was already piled halfway up the first-floor windows. "No plow is getting through that. Not today. We're on our own." The gravity of my words finally seemed to penetrate their bubble of denial. The fight went out of them, replaced by a sullen, helpless silence. They slumped onto the sofa near the fire, two powerful men suddenly reduced to the status of refugees in their own home. And then, a new sound cut through the howl of the wind. Faint, frantic ringing. It was so out of place that for a moment none of us could identify it. It was my old phone. Not my modern smartphone, but the emergency satellite phone I kept in the bottom of my medic bag. I had charged it before I left the base, a force of habit I never skipped. I had an active prepaid SIM that I maintained for exactly this kind of worst-case scenario. I pulled the sat phone from my bag. My father and Leo stared at it as if I had just produced a unicorn. "What is that?" Leo breathed. "It's a satellite phone," I said simply, answering the call. The connection was scratchy, filled with static, but the voice on the other end was clear enough. It was panicked. It was our neighbor, Martha Gable, a sweet woman in her late 70s who lived a quarter-mile down the road. "Maya." "Oh, thank God, Maya, is that you?" she sobbed. "It's Henry." I fell. He was trying to get the generator started, and he slipped on the ice. "Oh God, Maya, his leg is turned the wrong way, and he's grabbing his chest. He says he can't breathe." Called 911, but the line is dead. I don't know what to do. The world seemed to slow down. My father and Leo looked at each other, their faces masks of horror and helplessness. "We can't do anything," my father whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "The driveway is impassable. We're trapped." But he wasn't talking to me. My mind was already working. Henry Gable, 79 years old. History of high blood pressure. Possible compound fracture of the tibia. Possible myocardial infarction secondary to trauma and exertion. Time was critical. I ended the call with a promise. "Martha, you keep him warm. Don't move him. I'm on my way." I turned and started issuing orders, my voice snapping with an authority that left no room for argument. The shift in me was instantaneous and total. I was no longer Maya, the disappointing daughter. I was Sergeant Collins, the medic in charge. "Leo, you're on fire duty. Keep it going, but don't let it get too hot. I don't want a chimney fire. Mom, I need blankets. Well, if you have them. And a large thermos. Fill it with the hottest water from the tap before the pipes freeze. Dad, get me the biggest, brightest flashlight you can find and a shovel. The one from the garage." They stared at me, their mouths slightly agape. For a heartbeat, my father's ingrained need to be in charge flickered. "Now, just a minute, who do you think you—" I cut him off, my gaze hard as steel. "There's no time for a committee meeting, Dad. Man might be dying. Are you going to help me or not?" Something in my eyes, something in my voice, broke through his lifetime of authority. He looked from my face to the swirling blackness outside the window, And for the first time I think he understood the chasm between his kind of power and mine. His was theoretical, based on influence and debate. Mine was tangible, immediate, and necessary. He gave a short, jerky nod and turned to go to the garage. Leo, looking utterly bewildered, scrambled to tend the fire. My mother, her hands trembling, scurried off to find blankets. I went to my room and pulled on my gear. Thermal layers, waterproof shell, insulated boots. I checked the contents of my field medic bag. My trauma shears, tourniquets, chest seals, 4 starter kits, pain medication, splints. It was all there. Ready. As I strapped the bag to my back, I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the window. A figure cloaked in black, face set with grim determination, ready to step out into the storm. My family had always wanted me to come home and live a real life. The irony was, I had just brought my real life home to them. And it was about to save them all. I opened the door and stepped out into the raging heart of the blizzard. The wind tore at me, and the snow blinded me, but I leaned into it and began to walk. I had a job to do. The quarter-mile to the Gables house was the longest, most brutal journey of my life. The world had ceased to exist beyond a 5-foot radius of my flashlight beam. The wind was a physical force, a solid wall of air and ice that fought me for every single step. It ripped the breath from my lungs and tried to tear the flashlight from my frozen fingers. Snow, driven into a horizontal frenzy, stung my exposed cheeks like 1,000 tiny needles. There was no road, no path, just a deep, shifting landscape of white. I navigated by instinct, by the vague memory of a particular oak tree, by the slight incline of the land that I knew led to their driveway. It was like moving through a sensory deprivation tank designed by a malevolent god. There was only the white noise of the storm and the pounding of my own heart. More than once I stumbled, sinking up to my waist in a snowdrift, the cold seeping instantly through my gear. The temptation to just lie there, to let the warm, insidious lethargy of hypothermia take over, was a seductive whisper in the back of my mind. But then I would see Henry Gable's face, pale and gasping for breath, and Martha's terrified eyes, and I would force myself back to my feet, gasping, my muscles screaming in protest. This was what my training had been for. Not just the medical procedures but the mental fortitude. The ability to push your body past its limits, to compartmentalize fear and pain, to focus only on the mission. My father thought I lacked ownership. Out here in this frozen hell, I owned every decision, every step, every breath. My life and Henry's depended on it. When I finally saw the faint, flickering light of their window, it was like a lighthouse in a stormy sea. I practically fell against their door, hammering on it with a numb fist. Martha wrenched it open, her face a mess of tears and relief. "Oh, Maya! Thank God!" The scene inside was just as bad as I'd feared. Henry was on the floor of their cold garage, his face a ghastly shade of gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. One look at his leg told me it was a compound fracture. The sharp white edge of bone was visible through the tear in his trousers. It was a clean break, but the angulation was bad. Worse, though, were the classic signs of a heart attack: the clutching at his chest, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold, the look of sheer terror in his eyes. I dropped to my knees beside him, my training taking over completely. All the noise, the fear, the storm, it all faded away. There was only the patient. "Henry, it's Maya. I'm here to help you. Can you hear me?" He managed a weak nod. "Okay, Henry. We're going to get through this." My voice was calm, steady, projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I turned to Martha. "Martha, I need you to be strong for me. I'm going to give you tasks. It's important you follow them exactly. Can you do that?" She nodded, wiping her eyes, grateful to have a purpose. "Good. I need all the blankets you have. And pillows. And I need you to find Henry's aspirin. A regular, 325 milligram aspirin." As she scurried off, I went to work. I couldn't move him, not with the potential spinal injury from the fall and the cardiac event. The priority was to stabilize. I used my trauma shears to cut away his pant leg, exposing the gruesome injury. I checked for a pulse in his foot. It was weak, but it was there. That was good. Next, the heart. I took his pulse at the wrist, thready and fast. His breathing was too quick. He was going into shock. Martha returned with the aspirin and a pile of blankets. Okay, Henry, I need you to chew this aspirin. Don't swallow it whole. Chew it. It would help thin his blood and reduce the strain on his heart. While he did that, I worked on his leg. I couldn't set it here, not without proper equipment and powerful analgesics, but I could and had to immobilize it to prevent further damage and reduce the pain. I used the pillows and blankets to pack around the leg, creating a soft, supportive splint that would keep it from moving. I covered him with the rest of the blankets, trying to fight off the hypothermia that was inevitably setting in. All the while I kept talking to him, a low, reassuring monologue. You're doing great, Henry. Just keep breathing for me. Slow and steady. Martha is right here. We're not going anywhere. I looked around the garage. In the corner, covered in a dusty tarp, was an old ham radio set. Henry had been a ham radio enthusiast for 50 years. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Martha, does the radio work? I think so, she stammered. He was talking to someone in Canada just last week. But it's on its own battery system. I don't know if it's charged. Show me. Took us 10 minutes, but we got it powered on. The battery was low, but it had life. I grabbed the microphone. I hadn't operated one of these since a basic comms course years ago, but the principles were the same. I started sending out a general distress call, using the emergency frequency. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is a civilian station in Northwood Creek. We have a medical emergency. Male, late 70s, with a compound fracture and suspected cardiac event. The town is isolated by a blizzard. All communication lines are down. Is there anyone on this frequency? Over. For a long time there was only static. Then a faint voice crackled back. This is Kilo Delta 19er. I read you, Northwood Creek. Your signal is weak. What is your situation? Over. My heart leaped. It was a local emergency response volunteer, a guy named Dave, broadcasting from his own basement setup 10 miles away. He was a lifeline. I quickly gave him a condensed sitrep, a situation report. The nature of the blizzard, the town's isolation, Henry's condition. I told him we needed to establish a command post. The town hall, I said. It has a backup generator. I'm going to try and get it operational and move non-critical townspeople there. Can be a triage and communication hub. Can you relay that to any county or state emergency services you can reach? Roger that, Dave's voice crackled. Will do. Godspeed, Northwood Creek. Kilo Delta 19er out. I had a plan. I had a link to the outside world. I had stabilized my patient. I turned to Martha. I have to go back. I have to get that town hall set up. But I will be back for Henry. Promise. Keep him warm. Keep talking to him. You are his rock right now. She nodded, her eyes full of a kind of awed gratitude that I was not used to seeing. I gave Henry's shoulder a final squeeze and headed back out into the storm. The return journey was just as brutal, but this time I was fueled by a sense of purpose so powerful it felt like its own heat source. I burst back into my own home, a whirlwind of snow and cold air. My father and Leo were exactly where I had left them, huddled by the fire, looking lost. They jumped to their feet when they saw me. Maya, are you all right? What happened? My father asked, his voice thick with a genuine concern that surprised me. I ignored his questions. There was no time. Henry Gable has a broken leg and is having a heart attack. He's stable for now, but we have to move. The town hall has a generator that runs on diesel. Leo, the key to the maintenance shed is on a hook in the town clerk's office. I need you to get in there, find the fuel cans and get that generator running. Now. Leo looked like I had asked him to build a rocket ship out of paper clips. Me. But I don't know how. You're a venture capitalist who invests in complex machinery. Figure it out, I snapped. Dad, when I was a kid you were on the town council. You know everyone. You're going to be my communications officer. I need you to go door to door, but only on this street. It's too dangerous to go further. Get a head count. Find out who needs help, who has medical conditions. Tell the able-bodied to get to the town hall as soon as the generator is running. It's our shelter. Mom, you're in charge of logistics here. Start gathering all the non-perishable food, blankets, and first aid supplies in this house. We're taking it all to the hall. They were stunned into silence by the sheer force of my command. This was the daughter they had dismissed as aimless, as running away. Now she was their only hope, the only one with a plan. My father, the senator, looked at me with a dawning, uncomfortable respect. He was used to giving orders, not taking them. But he saw the look in my eye, the same look he probably saw in the eyes of generals and corporate CEOs. It was the look of someone in complete command of a chaotic situation. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice humbled. "I'm going to save this town," I said. And with a sense of grim determination, I started gathering my supplies. The real work was just beginning. The transformation of the Northwood Creek Town Hall from a sleepy municipal building into a functioning emergency operations center was a testament to the power of desperate, focused improvisation. When I arrived, Leo was already there. His face smudged with grease and his cashmere sweater ruined, but the triumphant roar of the big diesel generator was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The lights were on, casting a stark, fluorescent glare over the large, wood-paneled assembly room. He looked at me, a strange mix of exhaustion and pride on his face. The fuel line was frozen. Had to thaw it with a lighter. Nearly set my eyebrows on fire. For the first time in years, my brother looked like he had done a day of actual work. My father arrived soon after, a small, shivering group of neighbors in tow. He was breathless, his face red from the cold, but he had a list scrawled on the back of an envelope. 7 houses on our block, he panted. 22 people. The Millers are fine, but their pantry is almost empty. Old man Hemlock is running low on his oxygen tanks. The rest are scared, but okay. He looked at me expecting praise, but I just nodded and pointed to a corner of the room. Good. That's our logistics hub. Mom is on her way with our supplies. Get the donations organized. Food here, blankets there. Medical supplies go on that table and nobody touches them but me. He was about to argue to pull rank, but then he saw the look on the faces of the neighbors he'd brought with him. They weren't looking at him, the senator, their powerful representative. They were looking at me, waiting for their next instruction. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. I was in charge. He was my subordinate. With a look of profound bewilderment, he went to the corner and started sorting cans of beans. People began to trickle in, then pour in. They came huddled in blankets, their faces etched with fear and cold. I had Leo and a few other strong volunteers set up rows of tables and chairs, creating makeshift cots and seating areas. I established a check-in desk at the entrance, where my mother, surprisingly organized and efficient in a crisis, took down names and any critical medical needs. The large assembly room slowly filled with the low hum of a community in shock, the quiet sobs of children, and the murmur of worried conversations. I set up my triage station on the main stage, the place where my father had given dozens of self-important speeches. I laid out my gear on a long folding table. My 4 kits, my diagnostic tools, my bandages and medications. It wasn't a hospital, but it was clean, well-lit, and it was mine. The work was relentless. A young boy having a severe asthma attack. His inhaler empty. I managed to stabilize him with a nebulizer treatment using a portable battery-powered device from my kit. An elderly woman who had gotten disoriented in the snow and was showing the first signs of severe hypothermia. We stripped off her wet clothes and wrapped her in a cocoon of dry blankets, forcing warm, sugary liquids into her. A volunteer from the hardware store who had sliced his hand open trying to board up a broken window. I cleaned the wound and stitched it closed with a suture kit, my hands steady and sure. With each patient I treated, with each problem I solved, I could feel the town's collective fear begin to subside, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. They had a leader. They had someone who knew what to do. Meanwhile, I had turned my father and brother into my logistical officers. They were completely out of their element, and it was a strange thing to behold. I sent Leo out with a team of volunteers to scavenge for more supplies. They went door to door to the empty houses of people they knew were away for the holidays, requisitioning canned goods, batteries, and blankets. My brother, the man who lived and died by property rights and investment returns, was now leading a team on a mission of organized looting for the greater good. He came back hours later, his truck filled with supplies, looking more alive and purposeful than I had ever seen him. My father's job was, in some ways, even more humbling. I made him the de facto manager of the shelter. He, the man accustomed to aids and assistance, was now mediating disputes over blankets, organizing bathroom schedules, and comforting crying children. I watched him at one point, sitting on the floor with a little girl who was missing her cat, patiently explaining that her pet was probably warm and safe, and that they would find it as soon as the storm passed. He was using his politician's charm not to win votes, but to soothe a terrified child. It was the most honest thing I had ever seen him do. But our biggest problem remained. Our supplies were finite. The town's diesel tank for the generator was large, but it wouldn't last forever. And Henry Gable was still lying in his garage with a broken leg and a damaged heart. I couldn't risk moving him without proper transport. We were on an island, and the tide was rising. That evening I got Dave back on the ham radio. The news was grim. The state had declared a major disaster. The storm was even worse than predicted. All roads were impassable, and the forecast said the snow wouldn't let up for at least another 36 hours. They were trying to coordinate air assets, but the wind and visibility were too poor for a helicopter rescue. We were on our own for the foreseeable future. A wave of despair washed over the room as the news spread. The fragile hope I had built began to crumble. People started to panic. A man named Peterson, a notoriously grumpy local farmer, stood up and pointed a trembling finger at me. "Who put you in charge anyway?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You're just a kid. What do you know about this stuff? We're all going to die here." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me. It was a critical moment. If I lost control now, the panic would spread like a virus. My father started to step forward, his instinct to manage the crowd kicking in, but I held up a hand to stop him. This was my challenge to face. I walked down from the stage and stood directly in front of Peterson, my gaze unwavering. "My name is Sergeant Maya Collins," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the cavernous room. "I am a combat medic with the 101st Airborne Division. I have treated injuries under enemy fire in 2 different countries. I know how to manage a mass casualty event with limited resources because I have done it before. Right now, our resources are this building, the supplies we have gathered, and each other. Panic is a luxury we cannot afford. It is a contagion that will kill us faster than the cold. So, Mr. Peterson, you have 2 choices. You can sit down and help, or you can go into that office over there and panic by yourself where you won't endanger anyone else. The choice is yours." The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Peterson stared at me, his bluster deflating under the weight of my absolute certainty. He looked around at his neighbors, who were all watching him, their expressions hard. Finally, he dropped his gaze and mumbled, "Sorry." He shuffled back to his seat, defeated. The challenge was over. My authority was now absolute. But I knew my words were only a temporary fix. We needed a real solution. We needed a miracle. I went back to my gear, my mind racing. There was one more card I had to play, a long shot. I pulled out my satellite phone. My father and Leo watched me, their eyes wide. They had forgotten about it in the chaos. "Who are you calling?" Leo asked, his voice a whisper. "A friend," I said. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It wasn't 911. It wasn't FEMA. It was the direct line for the operations desk of my unit's command liaison with the National Guard. A gruff, familiar voice answered on the second ring. "Master Sergeant Evans." Robbie, it's Maya Collins. Collins, what the hell are you calling me for? You're supposed to be on leave, enjoying civilization. Civilization is currently buried under 8 feet of snow, I said, my voice all business. I gave him a quick, professional sit-rep, using the precise, emotionless language of the military. I detailed the number of civilians, the status of our supplies, the critical medical patients, the failure of local infrastructure. I wasn't a desperate civilian begging for help. I was a non-commissioned officer in the field, reporting to a superior and coordinating a mission. I've established a civilian shelter at the Northwood Creek Town Hall. GPS coordinates to follow. We have power and we are stable, but our medical and food supplies will become critical within 24 hours. I am formally requesting an emergency supply drop via airdrop. I have identified a primary and secondary drop zone, clear of obstructions. I need insulin, general antibiotics, sterile dressings, batteries and MREs. High protein, high calorie. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him typing. Jesus, Collins. You don't do anything by halves, do you? You've got a whole town on your hands. Just doing my job, Master Sergeant. All right, he said, his tone shifting from surprise to serious. The weather is hell, but we have a Chinook crew on standby at Westover who are crazy enough to try it if there's a break in the storm. I'll put in the request. No promises, Maya. But we'll try to get it to you. Send me those coordinates. And Collins, stay safe. Always, Robbie. Collins out. Hung up the phone. The entire room had been listening, silent. My father looked at me, his face a canvas of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Awe, confusion, pride, and something that looked like fear. He had spent his life building networks of influence, calling in favors, and manipulating systems. In 5 minutes, I had bypassed all of it and spoken a language of competence and trust that he could never understand. He finally saw that my phase wasn't a phase at all. It was a world, a profession, a brotherhood with its own power, its own rules, and its own kind of nobility. He finally saw me, not as his runaway daughter, but as a soldier. And he was speechless. The hours that followed the call were the longest of the entire ordeal. The blizzard raged on, a relentless, malevolent force. The atmosphere in the town hall was a strange cocktail of hope and dread. I had given them a reason to believe, but the promise of a helicopter in a storm like this felt impossibly remote. All we could do was wait and work. I made my rounds, checking on patients, rationing the dwindling food supplies, and forcing people to rest. I sent Leo out with a team to try and clear a path to the Gables house, a back-breaking, almost futile effort against the endlessly accumulating snow. My father found me as I was repacking my medical kit, preparing for the possibility that the drop wouldn't come. He stood there for a long moment, watching my hands work, my fingers moving with practiced efficiency as I organized bandages and checked vials of medication. He seemed to be searching for words, a rare state for a man who made his living with them. "I never understood," he finally said, his voice quiet and hoarse. I thought you were choosing a life of hardship because you were afraid of the life we had planned for you. Afraid of failing." He shook his head, a look of dawning self-awareness in his eyes. "But that's not it, is it? You weren't running away from anything. You were running toward this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the rows of people sleeping on tables, at my makeshift clinic on the stage. "This is what you do." Paused, my hands still. "Yes," I said. "This is what I do. All my life," he went on, his gaze distant. "I've built things. Career, a portfolio, a public image. It's all theoretical. It's a house of cards. One gust of wind." He looked toward the howling darkness outside the window. "And it all comes down. But this, what you're doing, it's real. Solid. You're not building an image. You're building a lifeline." He finally looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine, unadulterated respect in his eyes. Not for the daughter of a senator, but for me. For Sergeant Maya Collins. Before I could respond, Leo came stumbling back inside, covered in snow, his face grim. "It's no use," he gasped, leaning against the doorframe. "We're making almost no progress. The snow is too deep. We'll never reach the gables in time." A collective sigh of despair went through the people who were awake enough to hear him. Felt like the final nail in the coffin. But just as the last vestiges of hope seemed to drain from the room, we heard it. At first it was just a low, rhythmic vibration, a feeling more than a sound. It was a deep, guttural thumping that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. It grew steadily louder, cutting through the constant shriek of the wind. Everyone froze. Heads lifted. Eyes widened. It was a sound of impossible mechanical power. Thump, 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 thump. I ran to the main doors and wrenched one of them open, shielding my face against the blast of icy wind. I peered up into the swirling gray chaos of the sky. For a moment there was nothing. Then, through a momentary break in the thick, roiling clouds, I saw it. A dark, massive shape, its landing lights cutting brilliant, impossible cones through the snow-filled air. It was a C-47 Chinook, one of the largest, most powerful helicopters in the Army's fleet, and it was descending toward the open field I had designated as the primary drop zone. A cheer erupted from the town hall behind me, a raw, explosive sound of pure, unadulterated relief. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. People were crying, hugging, laughing. They poured out of the doors, heedless of the cold, to watch the miracle unfold. The helicopter didn't land. It hovered, a magnificent roaring beast of a machine, holding its position against the ferocious wind with incredible skill. The side door slid open, and figures in military gear appeared. Then the pallets came down. One after another, they were pushed from the bay, their small parachutes snapping open and guiding them down to the snowy field below. They were crates of food, boxes of medical supplies, batteries, blankets, a lifeline from the sky. I stood there, apart from the cheering crowd, and just watched. The wind whipped my hair across my face. The cold was biting, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was a profound, quiet sense of vindication. It wasn't triumphant or gloating. It was deeper than that. It was the feeling of a purpose fulfilled. My two worlds, which had always been in such violent opposition, had just collided. And the one my family had dismissed, the one they saw as a failure, had just saved the one they revered. After the helicopter had vanished back into the storm, and a team of volunteers had hauled the precious cargo inside, my father and Leo found me. They stood before me, two powerful, successful men, utterly humbled. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by the storm, replaced by a raw, new awareness. Richard spoke first. His voice choked with emotion. "Maya, we were wrong. Completely and utterly wrong." He struggled with the words, the admission of fault so alien to him. "What you do, the life you chose. It's not running away. It's running toward the fire. We were the ones who were hiding behind our money, our titles, our influence. When a real crisis came, we were useless." Leo, who had always been so quick with a sarcastic remark, just nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "My entire life is about calculating risk and maximizing returns," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I talk about impact and scaling solutions in boardrooms. It's all just words. You just did it. You saved an entire town with nothing but your skills and your courage. I move money around on a screen. You save lives." He finally looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Maya. For everything. For every joke, for every dismissal. I'm so sorry." It was the apology I had craved for years. The validation I had fought for, bled for, and been denied time and time again. But now that it was here, delivered in the chaotic, joyful aftermath of our rescue, it felt strangely distant. It was like receiving a letter you had been waiting for, only to find you no longer remembered what you had written. I had spent so much of my life looking for their approval, and in the crucible of the storm, I had found something far more valuable. My own. I just nodded, a deep, weary sigh escaping me. The external validation was a bomb, but the wound it was meant to soothe had already begun to heal itself. "Let's get these supplies organized," I said, my voice gentle. "We still have work to do. We still have to get Henry." And turning away from them, I walked back into the warmth and light of the town hall, a leader with a job to finish. The break of dawn the next morning felt like a cosmic apology. The wind had died down, and the snow had finally stopped. A weak, watery sun filtered through the thinning clouds, illuminating a world transformed, a landscape of sculpted white drifts and silent, buried trees. The silence was profound, a peaceful stillness after the violent chaos of the storm. With the first light came the distant, grinding sound of heavy machinery. The state plows had finally broken through on the main highway, their blue and yellow lights flashing like beacons of a returning civilization. My work, however, was not quite done. The first official emergency crews to arrive were a team of paramedics in a specialized tracked vehicle. I met them at the door of the town hall, clipboard in hand. I gave their lead medic a calm, professional handoff report, detailing every patient I had treated, every medication I had administered, and the current status of the most critical cases, starting with Henry Gable. The paramedic, a man with tired eyes and a graying mustache, listened intently, nodding. He looked around the organized, functioning shelter, at the inventoried supplies, at the calm, safe townspeople. He shook my head. "You did a hell of a job here, Sergeant," he said. His voice filled with a professional respect that meant more to me than my family's tearful apology. A hell of a job. My father and Leo stood in the background, watching the exchange. They saw the easy camaraderie between me and the other first responders, the shared language of service, the mutual respect born of shared experience. They saw me coordinate the evacuation of Henry, directing the team with a quiet authority that they now recognized. They were watching me in my world, a citizen of a nation they hadn't known existed, and they were, for the first time, complete outsiders. Later that day, the town's mayor held an impromptu press conference. He stood on the steps of the town hall, flanked by FEMA officials, and publicly, effusively thanked me. He called me the Angel of Northwood Creek. My father, a man who lived for the spotlight, stood in the crowd, just another face. His own political influence completely eclipsed by his daughter's actions. It was a subtle, public humiliation, and I knew it cost him more than any private apology. Returning to the house was surreal. The power was still out, but the atmosphere had undergone a seismic shift. The silence was no longer tense and judgmental. It was thoughtful, almost peaceful. We worked together to clear the snow from the porch and walkways. This time I didn't have to give orders. Leo just picked up a shovel and started digging. His movements clumsy but determined. My father ferried hot coffee to us, a humble domestic act that was so out of character it was almost shocking. That evening, sitting around the fire, the conversation was different. There were no more condescending questions or dismissive remarks. Instead, Leo asked me about my medical training. His questions specific and genuinely curious. He wanted to know about triage theory, about how I stayed calm under pressure. My father asked for my opinion on the town's emergency preparedness plan, admitting it was woefully inadequate. He took notes on a legal pad as I outlined the vulnerabilities the storm had exposed and suggested practical, concrete improvements. They weren't just talking to me. They were consulting me. They were treating me as an expert, as an equal. A few days later, the roads were clear, and it was time for me to return to base. I was packing my gear in my room when my father appeared in the doorway. He was holding a folder. "Maya," he began, his tone hesitant. "I've been making some calls." He opened the folder. It was information on a high-level administrative position, a civilian role managing emergency logistics for the entire state. It's a director-level job. It would mean a huge pay raise, a corner office. You'd be in charge of designing the very protocols we needed this week. You've more than proven your point. You've shown us all what you're capable of. It's time to come home, Maya. For real this time. You can do so much good here, in a safe, respectable position. It was the ultimate test. It was everything they had ever wanted for me. offered on a silver platter. It was a life of influence, comfort and safety. A real life. The old Maya, the one who ached for his approval, would have leaped at the chance. It was the perfect compromise, a way to use my skills while finally fitting into their world. But I wasn't the old Maya anymore. The storm hadn't just buried a town, it had buried the part of me that needed their permission to be whole. I looked at the folder, then back at my father's hopeful face. I smiled, a genuine, gentle smile. "Thank you, Dad. I appreciate it. More than you know." I pushed the folder back into his hands. "But I already have a real life. And my team is waiting for me." His face fell, but it wasn't with the old anger or disappointment. It was with a new, dawning understanding. He was finally beginning to see that my life wasn't a rejection of his, but simply a different path, one with its own value, its own honor. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Maya. Just be careful." "Always," I said. And for the first time I think he believed me. A year has passed since the great blizzard. I'm writing this from a dusty, sun-baked patrol base thousands of miles from the snows of Northwood Creek. My life is still one of discipline, service, and occasional moments of sheer terror, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. My relationship with my family has changed in ways I never thought possible. We have video calls every week. They don't talk about my phase anymore. They ask about my work, about the soldiers I serve with, about the challenges I face. They listen. A few months ago my dad called me, his voice bursting with pride. A flash flood had hit the valley near our town, and the emergency plan I had helped him design had been put into action. The communication network held. The pre-designated shelters were opened quickly. The volunteer response teams I had suggested were mobilized efficiently. No one was hurt. They were calling it the Collins Protocol. My brother in his own way has changed too. He started a foundation that provides funding and logistical support for veteran-owned businesses. He says he wants to invest in people who build real things, not just apps. It's his way of making amends, of trying to understand my world. The blizzard taught me a lesson that I carry with me every single day. It taught me that the validation you get from others is a fleeting, unreliable thing. Can be given and taken away in a heartbeat. But the validation that comes from within, from knowing your own worth, from testing your own strength against the world and not breaking, that is forged in fire. That is permanent. I spent so many years believing I was running away from the life they wanted for me. But the truth is, I was running toward the person I was always meant to be. I just had to survive a storm to finally find her. And so that's my story. It's a story about how being underestimated can sometimes be the greatest gift you are ever given. It forces you to find your strength not in the applause of others, but in the quiet, steady beat of your own resilient heart. What about you? Have you ever had a moment, big or small, that completely changed the way your family saw you, or more importantly, the way you saw yourself? I would be honored if you would share your story in the comments below. It's in sharing these experiences that we realize we are not alone. And as always, don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your power in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening. I want you to remember that family is not just about the blood you share, but about the love you give and the respect you earn. Be well and be strong.